All right, guys, welcome back. And today, what we're going to talk about is continuity of operations. Okay, we are on our road to go ahead and get our Comptia Security Plus certification. And this here is a critical component of cybersecurity. Excuse me. Remember our CIA triad. Okay, our CIA triad is critical. I love our CIA triad because its simplicity goes ahead. It's so subtle, but its simplicity literally goes ahead and it always gives you a framework. It gives you a playbook, so to speak, to play with. Okay, continuity of operations. Let me ask you this on this topic alone, continuity of operations, are we dealing with confidentiality? Are we dealing with integrity? Or are we dealing with availability? Okay, continuity of operations. So take a quick second. Are we dealing with confidentiality? Are we dealing with integrity? Or are we dealing with availability? Okay, and the answer is availability. If you can have the world's greatest business operating in the internet, and you have the best business idea, and you have the best marketing, and you have the best streamlined software that can go ahead and generate tons and tons and tons of money, but if your system is broken, if your hardware is having issues, if there's a bug in the software and you cannot operate that business online, guess what? You no longer have the world's greatest business. So we, as cybersecurity professionals, or as professionals in the IT industry, our whole goal is to keep the operations moving, regardless if there's a hurricane, regardless if there's a power outage, regardless if there's malware, regardless if we've been hacked, so to speak. Continuity of operations is a critical component. It doesn't necessarily only deal with the managerial aspect, because as a technician, if you can make your manager's job easier, you promise you will be benefited in the long term. Continuity of operations. So let's get into this presentation here. Remember, we're dealing with the availability component of the CIA triad. We want to keep our business going, moving, and flowing. So, one of the first things here is what they call BCP. And this is an acronym, and it stands for Business Continuity Plan. Addresses responses to disruptive events, aka incident. Now, I want you to take this. This is really simple, and this is something you just literally have to just memorize, put it in a flashcard, remember it, so on and so forth. Business continuity plan. Okay, but I want you to distinguish the difference between a BCP and a DRP. Okay, a DRP is a disaster recovery plan. Okay, and it's technically, the DRP is under the BCP, and the difference is that the DRP, also known as a disaster recovery plan, that deals with disasters. And I know what you're thinking. Hey, Alex, what's going on? What's the difference between an incident and a disaster? Okay, an incident can be something as simple as, hey, the server went down, there was a power outage. Okay, a disaster recovery, or a disaster, a DRP, would be something like, hey, the whole office was flooded, or hey, there was a landslide and it took off half the building. Okay, so you guys can start to see that a DRP is a lot bigger, so to speak, with regards to the magnitude. It can be something as like earthquake. Hey, a meteor came down and hit the office, and now we can't operate business. Okay, that's not good for the business. That's not good for the people. Remember, the whole topic of this is the continuity of operations, keeping your operations going with the data that you have in order for you to go ahead and continue the business. But that's just something I really want to touch on. BCP versus DRP. Okay, business continuity plan. Incidents you're dealing with, I don't want to say minor, because being hacked would technically be considered an incident, and it wouldn't necessarily be considered, depending on a hack, right? But it wouldn't be considered something as major as, hey, half of the office is missing because we had a natural disaster. Okay, so DRP, keep that in mind, the difference between BCP and DRP. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what we can do as an organization in order for us to keep our business going and keep things moving and flowing. So, redundant sites. Okay, redundant site or sites. Okay, so this is something that would be a nice, good little screenshot to take. And the reason why I say that is because when I was taking some of the practice tests, so on and so forth, this is like one of those questions that they're going to ask, something along the lines of, hey, there was a natural disaster, and which one of these sites would best be beneficial if their office was completely destroyed? And then this is pretty obvious and pretty simple, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's something that you do want to memorize. And obviously, the answer for that would be a hot site. Okay, so let's go through these. You have a hot site, you have a warm site, you have a cold site, and you have a mobile site. Okay, so, hot site, what exactly is that? A hot site is considered a fully equipped backup facility ready to take over. Okay, so that's something that is just like, hey, we got our backup servers, we have our database, we have computers, we have a location, we have an identical location here on this site. That's our hot site. A warm site on the other side is more so what would basically be something where, hey, we need a few days. It's not ready to go. We can't bring people on board just yet. Give us a couple days. We need to get some boots on the ground, so to speak, so we can get this operation up and running. Okay. A cold site, would be like, hey, we rented an office. The office is completely empty. But we don't have anything in there. We don't even have desk on there. Uh, we're gonna need to run a mission to go out, get some chairs, a desk, electrical equipment, so on and so forth. A mobile site. Okay, this is something that some of us have experienced, and something that was actually really recent. A mobile site, going back to actually the pandemic, okay, which was not too long ago. Notice that a lot of people started saying, hey, we're going to work from home. We're going to work from home, right? The pandemic was technically considered a disaster. Okay, so on and so forth. So instead of saying, hey, we're not going to operate at all because we don't want you guys in the office, what they did was, hey, we're going to go ahead and do a mobile site. So something as simple as working from home, which would be considered a satellite location. Okay, where it's just like, hey, if you have your laptop or if you have your computer and you have internet access, we need you to get onto what would be the office network, and we can go ahead and continue operations. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense between a hot site, a warm site, a cold site, and a mobile site. Okay, let's go ahead and continue moving forward, which brings us to word of the day. Okay, guys, word of the day. This is actually our new addition to our videos where we try to go ahead and increase our cybersecurity vocabulary. And let's see what we have for word of the day. Word of the day: attestation. Attestation. I believe that's how you pronounce it, but it is spelled Atteation. And the definition is process that involves the formal validation or confirmation provided by an entity that is used to assert the accuracy and authenticity of specific info, and that can be used in software, hardware, or system. Can you give me an example? Uh, let's see here. The software that we downloaded, it could potentially be, after going ahead and reviewing the attestation of the software that we downloaded, it seems like it might actually be a Trojan malware. Okay, so attestation, guys, what does that mean? I just gave you guys the definition, but as you guys already know, I like to break things down into something that is a little bit more digestible, a little bit more common speak, so to speak. So, attestation, honestly, that would have to do with trustability. Okay, attestation is just a fancy word. Okay, remember the key word here, guys, is formal validation or confirmation provided by an entity. Okay, So that basically means, like, for example, if you have okay, if you have let me give you an example of Dracula, Dracula. Okay, if Dracula is in charge of the blood bank, and you want to make sure that if you perform an audit on the blood bank, and you're saying, hey, we need to make sure that we have a certain amount of levels of type A, B, and C, and so on and so forth, and we want to go ahead and make sure that this checks out. If Dracula is in charge of the blood bank and Dracula says, hey, here's our report, would that be a good attestation of the report? Would you trust the report? Okay, so that's what I mean by attestation. In other words, you would want to go ahead and have separation of duties. You would want to go ahead and have it be verified. Attestation. This actually reminds me of the certificate authority. Like, if you are writing your own certificate authority for your own system, would that be a trustworthy certificate? Right? That's why the certificate authority is a third party that would go ahead and say, "Hey, this certificate is legitimate. We checked it. We are basically, we don't have a conflict of interest in going ahead and giving this certification, so on and so forth." Okay, so keep that in mind. Attestation. Okay, so the process that involves the formal validation or confirmation provided by an entity that is used to assert the accuracy and authenticity of specific info. And what does attestation mean? Think of it in trustworthy. Is this software trustworthy? Is this hardware trustworthy? Is this system trustworthy? And you can have attestation in all three of those aspects. And it basically means that you're going ahead and you're doing your due diligence in order to go ahead and validate it. Which, actually, I don't want to talk too much about this on the word of the day, but I would say this: it kind of reminds me of the integrity aspect of the CIA triad, and I will go ahead and leave it there. So let's continue forward with our continuity of operations. The next thing is called parallel processing. Okay, parallel processing. And that basically, what that does is it replicates data and processes onto a secondary system running both in parallel. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if you have Office A and you have Office B and you have them configured exactly the same way, those would be considered parallel processing. Okay. And that's something that you would definitely want to do in order to go ahead and have redundant, basically a redundant operation. Okay. Let's go on to the next one, which is tabletop exercises. And believe it or not, I received a lot of questions on this with regards to what would be the practice exams and what exactly is a tabletop exercise. Okay, let's read the formal definition, which states involve simulated scenario discussions among stakeholders to assess and improve crisis. So basically, guys, what a tabletop exercise is going ahead and gathering your people, so to speak, and going ahead and presenting a scenario. Okay, so it would be something as simple as, hey guys, we're all going to get together. We're going to go ahead and do a tabletop exercise, and they're going to go ahead and throw something your way. Something along the lines of, hey, server B.3 in Office 2 is down, go. Right. And at that point, you'd say, okay, server B.3 office here. Okay, so this server is responsible for X, Y, and Z. What do we need to do? Do we have a redundant server? Do we need to get a backup server? What can we go ahead and do? Okay. And then that would be considered a tabletop exercise. Okay, so they give you a scenario, and within that scenario, you guys come together to figure out, okay, what do we do? Okay, and then this when it comes to the practice test, for example, they would say something along the lines of, "Hey, you're, hey, you want to go ahead and test your ability for cybersecurity resiliency, but you do not want to go ahead and bring or slow down operations during busy times. What would be a good way to go about um, going ahead and testing your system, uh, would you go ahead and do a live penetration test during that time? Or would you go ahead and do a tabletop exercise, right? And obviously, maybe that wasn't phrased eloquently, but as you guys can see, the whole purpose of a tabletop exercise is to gather your people, go ahead and present a scenario and discuss, right? And five brains are better than one. So once you get five professionals going ahead and thinking about, hey, what if X happens? What if B happens? What would you do? What do we need to do? What if this happens out here? Well, so being able to go ahead and collaborate, work as a team, and communicate to figure out all the possibilities of that specific scenario and what it would entail. So let's go on to the next one, and I believe that's actually it, guys. That is it. So remember what we talked about today. We talked about tabletop exercises. Don't forget this one, because this honestly, I feel, can definitely help. Parallel processing is where you basically have, think of this almost as an identical twin. Attestation, that was our word of the day. What's another word for attestation? Trustworthy, right? Remember the key word: validation or confirmation. And it's not something that an organization in and of itself would go ahead and validate. It would be more so of a third party. Okay. And let's go ahead and remember, we talked about our redundant sites. We talked about a hot site, a warm site, a cold site, a mobile site. Okay, this would be a good screenshot to take and remember and study. Okay, DRP, remember, DRP is a disaster recovery plan, which is considered a subset of BCP. And remember, the key word with DRP is disaster. Disaster is different from an incident. With the disaster, you're dealing with the magnitude of something as, hey, half of the office is missing, or hey, the office is going ahead and it is completely flooded. Disaster related. Okay, and then BCP is basically the whole purpose of this presentation, which is going ahead and talking about ideas in order for us to go ahead and continue the business continuity plan. Okay, and this deals with incidents. Okay, and that is it, ladies and gentlemen. So we will go ahead and see you guys on the next one.